2020 was rough, but at least the tropics in the Western Pacific was not as bad as it is in typical years. If you compare actually 2020 Western Pacific typhoon season up with the hurricane season in the Atlantic, the hurricane season was in fact much worse. That aside though, we did have some very potent and serious storms and some rapidly intensifying storms that could be a hallmark of what is to come in the future. Let's recap what happened here in 2020 across the Western Pacific. Overall, the season had a slow start, but once it got going, it really churned on, especially in the second half of the season. But unlike other tropical basins, the Western Pacific typically sees a storm every month, including the months from January through April. What was unusual about 2020, we didn't have any named storm systems. In fact, the first named storm didn't come along until May 8th with Typhoon Vongfong, locally known as Ambo, in the Philippines. This storm actually hit the Philippines on May 14th and rapidly intensified just prior to landfall, a theme of 2020 that we've seen a few times, storms exploding in intensity in just the course of a few hours. Yet after Vongfong moved through the Philippines, we didn't see another typhoon until August with Hagupit. At the same time Hagupit formed, we had another low that was spinning over the Philippines and was named Sinlaku. A bit of a FujiWara effect actually took place even between these two storm systems. Moving ahead to mid-August, we had Typhoon Bobby, which actually passed just north of Okinawa. This is one of those classic storms that showed even though the eye in the center of circulation may not hit you, we still have a very large wind field that impacted the southern Japanese islands. And even the day Bobby dissipated, MAYSAK formed just east of the Philippines and headed towards the southern Japanese islands, including Okinawa yet again. In fact, it moved over Okinawa and onto South Korea, where 2 deaths occurred and thousands lost power. The worst of the impacts from Typhoon MAYSAK actually did not take place on land though. Tragically, on September 22nd, the Gulf Livestock 1 capsized, killing 43 souls on board, including 39 Filipinos, as well as 5,700 cattle went down with the ship. Behind Typhoon MAYSAK, HAISHEN formed. The storm exploded into a monster super typhoon south of Japan, but thankfully this was one of those that maxed out well over water. It did weaken before it hit Japan, but the problem was it brought a tremendous amount of rainfall, causing mudslides and at least 2 deaths in western Japan, including upwards of $1.7 billion in damages. Just a few days later, Typhoon MOLAVE, known as Quinta in the Philippines, hit southern Luzon and northern Visayas. The storm resulted in 27 deaths as it moved over the Philippines. The storm also made a total of 5 landfalls as it island hopped across the archipelago. Then Typhoon MOLAVE moved on to Vietnam, and as it started to dissipate, the strongest storm of 2020 was spinning up on its heels. Kilometers per hour in that center of circulation. That is the strongest landfalling typhoon since Typhoon Haiyan, and actually matches Typhoon Haiyan as far as wind speeds are concerned. And this was Typhoon Goni, known as Rolly in the Philippines. The storm started off just west of Guam on October 26th, but on October 29th, the bottom fell out on this storm. In just 24 hours, we've seen it go from a tropical storm to a super typhoon with winds upwards of 220 kilometers per hour and a pressure down to 905 hectopascals. This being a classic case of the Philippine sea effect, when you have very warm sea surface temperatures just off the east coast of Luzon combined with superb upper level conditions, it allows for some dangerous rapid intensification. The storm made landfall on November 1st as a super typhoon in southeastern Luzon. For the first time since Haima in 2016, Pagasa even used their Signal Force 5 warnings. 25 died in this storm, 400 were injured, and damages were well into the millions of dollars. Now, if Goni was the type of boxer that comes in swinging and just looking for the big punch right off the bat, then Typhoon Vamco, known as ULYSSES in the Philippines, was the one that sits back and waits for the right time to strike. The storm was not as strong as Goni, but it still maxed out as a Category 4 storm. Not a weak storm to say the least. But the worst of the impacts actually took place north of the center of circulation as it passed over the Philippines, impacting Manila, by the way, and causing widespread power outages in the NCR as it moved through overnight. But behind it, a stream of moisture flowed in, causing significant flooding in the Manila area, including further north into Luzon across the Cagayan Valley, where thousands were forced to evacuate as numerous streams flooded the Cagayan River, causing near record high flood levels. Due to this flow of moisture behind the storm, Typhoon Ulysses was the deadliest of 2020. 196 souls were lost and millions were impacted. Now, as we continue to wrap up 2020, the Philippines seen a few more rainmakers, including tropical depression. Eventually came Tropical Storm Kraven, but Tropical Depression Vicky, which moved over the Philippines. The problem with this system is that it brought rains to already saturated grounds from the previous storms, which resulted in yet additional flooding. Now, I know I didn't cover all of the storms here in 2020. I would be here for quite a long time if I listed them all the way through. There was plenty of stuff. There was plenty of impacts in small and big ways. So share your story. What was the #1 thing that stuck out to you? You can post that down in the comment box below. Of course, as always, thanks for watching. I hope you have a fantastic New Year's. Let's hope 2021 shapes up better for all of us across the world, and including here in the Western Pacific. I'm meteorologist Robert Speta. Secondary